Good evening, everyone. Brian, is this on? Yeah, you can hear me okay? All right. Well, good evening. I am Jeff Paulette from the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, and I am happy to welcome you here tonight to the first event of the annual series from the World Affairs Council of West Michigan. This is our second year partnering with the World Affairs Council, and we are really happy to do this. I thought last year it was an excellent series, and it's a really good partnership, I think, for both parties. And of course, we are here in the museum that is operated by the National Archives, and we partner with the National Archives to hold educational events here in their museum. And so we are grateful to our partners at the museum for hosting this and for all the work they do in promoting the work being done by the World Affairs Council. So thank you for coming, and I will turn it over to Erica.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan's 2025 8-week Great Decisions series with topics suggested by the Foreign Policy Association. I'm Erica Kubik, Director of Programming for the Council, and on behalf of my colleagues Rachel Brooks, Abigail Stead, and Michael Van Tenend, as well as the Board of Directors of the Council, I thank you for your attendance both here and in person and online. We're pleased to host the Great Decisions series at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum and deeply grateful to the museum staff and to the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation for this partnership and support. Thank you as well to the GRCC and museum video teams for their expertise enabling our live stream broadcast. It's the Council's mission to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. To change the world, we believe one must first know the world. And you can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. Our appreciation is also given to WGVU's Public Media as a presenting media sponsor and to the Community Media Center as communication partner. And now, let me introduce our presenter for this evening. Mr. John Austin is a great friend of the Council, and we're grateful he has returned to Grand Rapids to begin our 2025 Great Decisions series for us. And I believe this is the 5th time that you've presented, which is wonderful and a credit to your expertise and your age, sure. John is now a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College, where he leads the Institute's work on international economy building and democracy strengthening. Austin has created and facilitates impactful international partnerships and initiatives. He also serves as a non-resident senior fellow with the Brookings Institution, where for over 20 years he has led efforts to support economic transformation in the American Midwest and in the industrial heartlands of Western democracies. Prior to joining the Eisenhower Institute, Mr. Austin created and led the Michigan Economic Center for 12 years, a network building and policy development organization to spur the transformation of Michigan's economy. He also served for 16 years as a statewide elected official, leading the Michigan State Board of Education and serving as board president. He received his master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a bachelor's from Swarthmore College in economics and political science. John's presentation tonight is titled Strengthening Democracy's Hand, Rebuilding Economy at Home and Allyshoring Abroad. Let's extend a warm welcome to John Austin.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank the World Affairs Council of West Michigan. I didn't know it was 5 times, but thank you for inviting me back again. And thank you for the first time I've been in this wonderful facility, the Presidential Library. So thank you for allowing us to have this talk in this symbolic space. You know, we are in a place here in a region, West Michigan, where the norm, and it was known for having strong kind of bipartisan internationalist foreign policy and leadership. That I was reminded coming over by Michael that this is the home of the former senator, late Senator Arthur Vandenberg, who once he shed his isolationist views during World War II, he articulated what was often the mantra that foreign policy in America needs to stop at the water's edge. You had great leaders, just President Ford, another internationalist, worked across the aisles, came together in terms of important topics about the world. Congressman Guy Vandegeg, more recently someone like Fred Upton, who I know. You've had leaders, whether you're liking right-leaning Pete Secchia or left-leaning Senator Carl Levin. Michigan was the home of internationalist leaders who engaged in the world. And it's something that's sorely missing, and we need to, I think, reanimate it from our politics today. But you here in West Michigan, being here, and I know many of your civic, business, political, educational leaders, you are still engaged, and you are constructively playing a role in the world. Your business community, your philanthropies, your education institutions, your political leaders are constructively engaging in the world, and your presence here tonight indicates that you are interested and committed to that project as well. I think it's very important. Now, yeah, I'm getting a lot older than I used to be, but for years in Michigan, I've been in Michigan 35 years. For years, I was focused on Michigan, what can be important to bring economic opportunity to more people and places in this state. Some of you may have been complicit. You elected me to the State Board of Education several times, education being probably job one if we want to help create economic opportunity and drive a robust, thriving economy and create jobs and move forward. I remember 20 years ago, I was asked by then Governor Granholm to be the policy director for the Cherry Commission, Lieutenant Governor John Cherry's Commission on Higher Education and Economic Growth. It had the who's who of Michigan leadership, the presidents of Ferris State, University of Michigan. It had Mark Murray, then president of Grand Valley State, one of my favorite people, many of you I'm sure know well, sort of shaping the state strategy for how do we leverage these great learning institutions to drive new innovations and new technologies and new startups and new businesses. How do we help more people achieve the highest possible level of education to realize their dreams and to contribute their talents to a more dynamic economy? And you here in West Michigan have done a way better job at that. 20 years ago, after some trips to Europe where I saw how they think kind of Europe-wide about spreading economic growth and developing regions that aren't finding it naturally, I came back and with Brookings, I created an initiative. Do we have a game plan to accelerate economic change across the whole Great Lakes, Midwest, Rust Belt, then at the time, 20 years ago, it was viewed. And we did that work with Brookings, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And from 20 years ago, we articulated sort of the first blueprint for understanding the economy of this industrial heartland, this cockpit of the great industries that ruled the 20th century. How do we extend and accelerate its evolution to be the center of innovation, new technologies, new jobs and businesses in today's century? And then, as some of you, if you've tuned in to some of the programs during COVID, 5 years ago, I linked arms with people who are doing similar work in democracies around the world, particularly the UK and Europe. How do we learn from each other and help each other accelerate economic growth in the regions of our countries that aren't finding it on their own? So the Rust Belts of France and the north of England, where the old mill and manufacturing towns were kind of hollowed out and people were feeling left behind. How can we help each other and learn from each other? And I think I did a program, what was it, 5 years ago during the peak of COVID. I think I'd gotten my first COVID vaccine shot the night I sat at my dining room table doing a program for you all on this international heartland transformation work. And I was very happy I'd gotten a shot. I was beginning to feel that ague that some of you may have felt when you got that shot. But we survived, I survived, hopefully the viewers survived. And then also about 5 years ago, I took this idea of we've got to revive our economies of our heartlands here in all of our homelands and our democracies. And in the face of COVID and supply chains disruption, we cannot, and we have to resist this temptation to kind of go it alone, onshore, make everything ourselves. You know, we saw that we were too dependent on China And so we began to promote this idea of, no, onshoring is destructive to our economies. We can't make everything ourselves. We need to ally shore. We need to lean into our globalized partnerships, co-production systems in a global economy, but with friends and allies in countries who share our values, that want to strengthen and support an open, rules-based free trade and economic system. So after doing this international economy strengthening and democracy strengthening work with partners around the world, I decided I need to find a home for that. And that's when I found that I'd worked some with the Eisenhower Institute, which is based at Gettysburg College, but it was created 40 years ago by granddaughter and the old friends, I don't know who they were, of President General Eisenhower, as an international policy center, a World Affairs Institute, to have convenings and to promote important policy agendas. And I thought this agenda that I'm working on of strengthening our economy, strengthening our democracies, working with our allies, Eisenhower is a pretty good brand to put that under. Because, you know, left, right, you can't argue with Eisenhower. You know, this is right. And in their offices, they have like portraits of General Eisenhower. So I've joked, I should do all my Zoom calls like with the general, the president looming. Like, oh, you want to disagree? Oh, can't argue with him. So that's what I've been up to. But so tonight, I want to talk about the current moment we're in. And then I want to come back and talk about why it is important to rebuild our own economies at home, in our own countries, and have everybody share in it. And then how we must do that work, which is important, help we find a future for our own people. We have to do it in a way that enhances, not diminishes, our collaboration with international partners, fellow democracies who share our values, this idea of ally shoring, working together to enhance our collective economic footprint. So let's talk about where we are right now. I think the world seems way scarier. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the wall fell 35 years ago. Remember, it was going to be the end of history, as some called it. The Cold War was over. Seemed like everything was going to work out great for the world. We didn't have this giant battle and tussle between warring systems, democratic, totalitarian. But today, as you know, we're seeing scary dynamics. Russia, though its economy is diminished, and it's really only the size of Italy, it's clearly looking to do whatever it can to kind of revert to grab as much of the old Soviet empire as possible. They're funding mercenaries in Africa and Syria, which just fell apart on them, to try to have bad actor friends who are on their side around the world as much as they can, send the Wagner group in to kind of buck up despots and who are raking money off the backs of their own people when they're mining minerals in Africa. They're funding, they're sowing confusion and propaganda and disinformation and trying to wreak havoc in democratic elections as often as they can. And obviously they're menacing the world with the nuclear weapons that they have more of than China and equal with us. But China is a kind of bigger and different and more challenging situation. They're much more globally engaged, more robustly a part of the international economic system, and they have a much bigger and more integrated economy. But over the last decade, as I hope you've observed, and I learned a lot from some friends who watch and sort of are China experts, they've begun to try with the Belt and Road and things to win over their own friends and allies in the developing world, but with a corrupting and dependency-building development model that benefits them and creates client states for them. They're certainly nakedly now taking over and quashing free expression in Hong Kong and Taiwan. They use control of critical supply chains for economic and political coercion to try to use that leverage to get political outcomes that they want. And we'll talk more about that. They're certainly quashing free thinking at home, surveilling their own people, censoring thought, sowing discord and disinformation as well as Russia, and meddling abroad. I mean, they're even like funding friendly to them candidates in places like Canada, who will be friendly to China, to the CCP. I mean, what is it? We're all messing with Canada. They're like the nicest people, They really want to be friends. They're less visible than most. They're working real hard. They've worked real hard to try to get control of lots of global multilateral institutions like the World Trade Organization, which we let them into, the World Health Organization, which we just, in my view, wrongly stepped out of, and things like the organizations that are like setting standards for production, like of EV battery components, so that the Chinese version is the one that becomes the global norm. They've worked very hard at these types of things. And the real goal, and he's articulated it, the leader Xi said, nothing short of sort of knocking down the international rules-based, open, rights-respecting, freedom-loving, if you want to call it that, order that we've helped create with our allies since World War II. So the leadership today in the last 10 years has been not to compete fairly with the US, which for many years we thought that's what they were about, although we're kind of aware they steal intellectual property and do some other things that kind of break the rules. But they really want to supplant the US as the world's largest and mightiest economic power and the mightiest global kind of political influence. Now, China, Russia, now joining with Iran and North Korea, working closely together, complementary ways, role-playing to authoritarians are helping each other, again, to kind of challenge and break apart the international system that we, people like leaders from this part of the world and Gerald Ford helped build after World War II. So that sounds pretty scary, right? And we all have a right to be concerned, and that is why our text for tonight is so important. We have to focus on how freedom-loving, rights-respecting nations can work together to strengthen our collective hand to once again contain those like Russia and others who would seek to overrun others by force, as well as to strategically check the Chinas of the world who seek to use influence, economic dependencies for coercion and advantage as they work to make their authoritarian model be acceptable and dominant in the world. Now, so beneath the surface of this scary scenario, I'm painting, there is some good news. And these fundamentals of what the good news is about our positioning, I think are real important to understand and aren't very well understood or reported in the popular media, what's up with China and all the things. Russia, while it's, threatening, it's scary got nuclear weapons, it cannot sustain this wartime economy, which is now turned to forever. Inflation there is rising, public services and non-military jobs are disappearing. The best and the brightest have all fled. And except for a few buddies, a few countries, rogue countries in the world, Russia is an international pariah, and particularly pariah in Europe. I'm working closely with a lot of European leaders. They've managed to, expand NATO, not break it apart, which was their hope and goal. And once the West and places like Germany were weaned from overdependence on Russia, oil and gas, no one in the world needs Russia's economy. We're not dependent on Russia's economy for anything. So their influence is not that great. Now, China, again, is a different positioning, different story. They've got a huge domestic market that our companies, American companies, have been dependent on, selling in. German companies selling cars in China is a big piece of their business. Anxious about losing that. And also, many of our nations here, Europe, Asia, are dependent on Chinese products. It's been a big part of, they were the factory of the world. They became that, relatively lower cost products of all sorts. And as we saw, with these industries that they purposefully, in many cases, heavily subsidized to be competitive and low cost because the Chinese government was basically allowing them to sell cheaper, they did that purposely to try to monopolize whole sectors. We learned about that when COVID hit, and we saw where do we get our personal protective equipment? Why is it all coming from China? Boy, that kind of is scary, that we don't want to be relying on China for giving us, selling us our PPE. So they also have been these, under the guise of kind of aggressive development investments with their Belt and Road program, they've tried to, buy friends, curry favor, or if not really making friends, then at least create critical dependencies that they control. So they control most of the critical minerals, and that's what they just responded to our tariffs. It's like, okay, we're not going to give you some of these critical minerals that you need to make your, smartphones and your semiconductors. in Africa. They've controlled 70% of the components of the batteries that go into EVs have been strategically controlled, their production, manufactured by China around the world, even if they're not doing it directly. They control the ports in Panama, which has gained some attention at both ends. Shipbuilding in Greece, we were just in Greece. It's like, Greece is one of the biggest shipbuilders in the world. It's the Chinese companies that control the port and the shipbuilding. They use things like that, not just to control those industries or those choke points of trade, but to collect information and to surveil and to even be able to purposely, if they want to, have cyber infrastructure attacks, if they want to go that route in a real confrontation with us. So those are the kinds of things they're doing. However, the good news is, despite all that, the U.S. remains the most dynamic and creative economy on earth. In a recent foreign policy, Foreign Affairs magazine, Jude Blanchett and Ryan Haas talk about, and I quote, "The United States still has a vital edge over China in terms of economic dynamism, global influence, and technological innovation." And let me just give you some of the real facts of that reality. So in dollar-adjusted terms, the U.S. economy is not only larger than China's, but also the next three biggest economies combined. And it's on track. We are on track to grow faster than any G7 economy, the U.S. American companies dominate global markets and key sectors. 9 of the 10 largest firms by market cap are American. China's largest firm, Tencent, is 26 on the list of largest firm by market cap. We keep our technologically innovative high ground. We are the ones that keep inventing the new disruptive technology that changes the economic game for the world, from the internet to the smartphone and now to AI. And despite the little Chinese, maybe cheaper AI innovation, way more US leadership in AI overall. 61 of the significant AI models are coming from the US. China has developed 15. And it looks like this China AI, was it DeepThink? DeepSeek. So certainly it's controlled in part by the Chinese government. Certainly we're unclear how much massive subsidy they poured into it to make it produce a cheap thing. And it looks like they're not really innovative. They're kind of ripping our technology off at probably and eating a high price to do it. So what we should care about most is, are we the country that keeps inventing the new thing that changes the game? And to date, we are. And that's the real economic strength that America has. For a lot of reasons, we have that strength. And I'll talk more about that. And so, again, Foreign Affairs was saying, the U.S. has relatively flexible regulatory framework, free collaboration between private sector and universities, and ability to both prepare and attract talent. And I say many of the talent that we prepare and attract, meaning that we attract particularly, are the best and brightest from the world. Immigrants, people that come here to go to university, or that come and bring their talents and do their thing in America because there's more freedom to be creative, there's more freedom to run your business the way you want, and we'll come back to that. So those are the things that give us a leg up. And so meanwhile, as we speak, Xi Jinping, through this new focus on state control, state direction, he's really killing the golden goose that lays the economic golden egg. 40 years ago, and again, I'm old enough to remember, Deng Xiaoping was the leader of China who opened up China. He basically did this incredible thing. He turned billions of entrepreneurial Chinese loose on the world to do their thing, to make things, to invent things, to make money and travel freely, to basically be capitalists. And it worked. I remember one of my first jobs out of college, I was working for then Governor Mike Dukakis of Massachusetts in the Massachusetts Office of International Trade. Massachusetts was one of the first states. We had a sister state relationship with Guangzhou province in China, which was the first one that Deng allowed to liberalize. When that group came over, a 15 Chinese trade delegation in 1987, and did a little expo with us in Boston, they didn't speak any English. They had 15 or 20 folks bringing ceramics and textiles, and they didn't have any hard currency. So we were going to put them up in a hotel in Boston. They couldn't afford it, so they out at some motel in Framingham, Massachusetts. And they had meetings, and you could tell there was the head of the delegation, and there was this cigarette-smoking Communist Party minder who was really in charge, who was keeping an eye on everybody to make sure no one ran away. Fast forward to like 5 or 10 years ago, Chinese business people, Chinese students are running around the world, and then they're going home happily because they're doing their thing. Big change, and it really worked. But today now, Xi is throttling China's economic engine. When you try to control minds and behavior and freedom of expression, thought and travel, as well as punish and police politically incorrect behavior, communication, or criticism of the regime, which is what they're doing, you kill creativity, you kill entrepreneurial energy, and you kill innovation. And that's what's happening now. So China's growth rate has steadily declined since its 2007 peak, and they cook the books anyway on their growth rates. China's population is now aging and falling. I mean, some of us are old enough to remember, China, it's gonna like multiply and overrun the world in one-child policy. So they wouldn't have too many people. Now their population is aging and falling. 70% of China's household wealth is tied up in housing market that has been collapsing. Money is leaving the country now, not coming in. Foreign direct investment, companies, people investing in China has dropped 80% between 2021 and 2023. And it's at the lowest level in 30 years. In 1 year, 2023 to 24, $254 billion quietly left the company. Business people with wealth, entrepreneurs trying to move their money out. Young people there don't see a brighter future, and they're doing something on social media called lying flat. You probably have seen this. They just lie around and they communicate with each other. They don't see a future. They don't see a hope. They don't see the chance to get ahead that they did a few years ago. Entrepreneurs are being cracked down on by the government if they don't conform exactly to their political demands. Venture capitalists are fleeing, and now Chinese immigrants, Chinese are showing up at the Mexican border to get into this country. Venture capitalists are saying, can we get one of those visas to go do our thing in the US? The people that are there in China with money to subsidize their growth are now trying to get into this country again. Let them in. So countries that now embrace the Belt and Road Development Scheme have now second thoughts because it's leaving them with a pile of debt, unfinished projects, corruption is accelerated because they're paying off the leaders to allow them to get the contract to build the thing. They're employing Chinese workers to build the highway in Montenegro. A place like Italy that, as a EU member, invited China in, have now kicked them out because they don't want that kind of development. However, but still China, Russia, India, Korea, often aided by countries, China, Russia, Iran, and Korea, often kind of aided by countries like India and Brazil and Turkey who want to kind of have it both ways and be friendly with the West, be friendly with them, keep their markets and supply lines open. They'll continue to test and try to push and try to diminish our so-called West and pick us apart from our allies, and also lean into and exploit us when we're fighting. I mean, just think of what happened. We want to fly military jets with returning, illegal entrants from Colombia. Colombia says, no, you can't land your military planes here. We threaten them with tariffs. First thing, China starts saying, hey, we're a good trading partner, Colombia. We'll work with you. And that's what they're doing all over the place, is say, no, we're not like those people, bossy Americans. So they're trying to pick us apart from our friends because Colombia is very dependent on our trade. So the Chinese are saying, you don't want to be that dependent on America that you have to cave in to the demands. Why don't you work with us? All right. So anyway, we have our own challenges at home. Russia, China, big challenges. So I'll take the risk and try to summarize, but you're all familiar with what our challenges are. And so let's talk a bit about our challenges and then how we can and why we must work together to meet them. So, my history, our history in this region, this was the, cockpit of the great economy that ruled the 20th century. All the great industries, from autos to aviation to oil to steel, appliances, everything, furniture was churned out of this part of the world. We've evolved quite a bit. I mean, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, Minneapolis was the flour milling capital of the world. Pittsburgh was the steel capital of the world. In between, Grand Rapids is the furniture city. Detroit's the auto capital of the world. Fast forward now, most of these regions have diversified and changed and evolved, but there's many communities that have lost their main anchors in their traditional industries and they're hollowed out, and we see them all around Michigan. Whereas a lot of communities like your own have kind of turned a corner and are growing again and found a way forward. And that's so there's really kind of two Rust Belts or two Midwests, here. There's communities like your own that's kind of turning a corner, and others that are in decline, lost their anchors, losing their young people. Places, like Flint and Saginaw, and you can look around Michigan. And Battle Creek right next to Kalamazoo is in decline, whereas Kalamazoo's found a way to grow again, even after they lost 40,000 Upjohn jobs. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Kalamazoo is growing again and thriving. So there's these different paths people are taking. But when your community's in decline, when it ain't what it used to be, when the young people have gone, there's not good jobs, the community's a little deteriorated, you look around, it's not full of life. That's where folks are the most anxious, and they're angry, and they're feeling left behind and neglected, and they're responsive to people that tell them, whether they're left-wing populists like Bernie Sanders or right-wing populists, like Donald Trump, you're getting screwed. Your life isn't what it should be. And it's the same story in Europe, where the north of England, they voted the UK out of Brexit. They were sending a message. The poor people who in shattered communities of the northern England, like, we want control of our life. That was the selling point for Brexit. Somehow, like, if we leave Europe and hate on immigrants, our life will be better. But they sent that message, and it really shook up the world. Same in the north of France is where the right-wing nationalists, Le Pen, it's the Rust Belt of France. That's where the Yellow Vest movement from rural voters who are feeling neglected looked down on by the elites in Paris, making all their decisions for them, and didn't understand their way of life and taxing them. If your community's in decline, you're very responsive to a message that says, I want to do something to change this system. It's not working for me. And so it leads to these understandable attitudes, kind of anti-system. Sometimes it takes the form of ethno-nationalism. Support for polarizing populists, whether they're left-wing or right-wing. They have them in Europe too. And both of these are polarizing our politics. It's pitting us against each other. Now, the Nobel Prize in Economics this last year, the Swedes awarded it to a trio of economists who wrote about things like why nations fail. And I think the Swedes were trying to send us a message. Their thesis, which they documented because they did rigorous research, not like me, but they sort of proved their point, is that if an economic system isn't working for most of the people, then people are willing to take a chance on those who say, I'm going to blow up the system for you. And that's what's behind the economic distress, economically anxious, insecure. Whereas if you're living in a place and you're feeling secure about your future, your family's future, you're more optimistic, you kind of act normal, You vote the issues. You vote what you believe in and what people say they believe in. So that's really one of the big dynamics that we have to understand better and somehow attend to better. And so, I mean, this region, I think, is a great example of a region that has still maintained, relatively speaking, some more moderation, some more thoughtful, less polarizing politics, though you certainly have pockets. And I think it's in part where, and we've sort of rigorously proved this, when regions are in decline, and it's true in Europe, they call it the geography of discontent. Like the regions that are in economic decline, that's where the anti-system voting is most heavy. It's where the AfD in Germany, the white nationalists, let's reach back for those guys. They're going to shake things up. That's where the voting for those policies happen. So that's the kind of work we're doing and the work I'm doing now with this Heartlands Transformation Network. We have 700 plus leaders of economic development, elected officials from 28 democracies, all sharing ideas and insights about how we help each other do this work well. We're bringing economic opportunity back to the people and places that aren't finding it on their own. I know Birgit Close, who's not here tonight, the former CEO of The Right Place, she emailed me. I guess she's got some vertigo, and she may be watching at home. She spoke at our first international confab, and she kind of stole the show told the Grand Rapids, West Michigan story of how you've purposely tried to evolve and diversify and reboot positively your economy. And her message was, build on who you are, the identity, the things you do, what you make. Build on who you are, take it into the future, and diversify. And we've had leaders from this region, from Randy Thalen and Rosalind Bliss and George Hartwell before, kind of share lessons from what you've done that others could benefit from and vice versa. So that's the kind of work we're doing. Alongside that work, 5 years ago, as I indicated, I re-met a woman, Elaine Dzinski, who I'd worked with on some of the original Brookings region, Great Lakes economic road mapping. And she'd gone off to Interpol and Davos Economic Forum, and she was tracking, what's going on in international security, international development. What is China really doing with Belt and Road? And like we did during COVID, I hadn't talked to Elaine in a long time. I wonder what she's up to. So we zoomed, and it's like, I'm trying to turn around industrial heartlands here and in other parts of our democracies. Like, I'm trying to figure out how we check China's bad behavior in the world. And so that's when we realized when the supply chains were cut, COVID hit, and those vulnerabilities to dependency on China or Russia or anyone else for key supplies, components was exposed. And our politicians start jumping around. Let's onshore everything. Let's make everything at home. It's like, no, economically that won't work. It will make us weaker economically if we try to go it alone. It's too expensive to make the whole smartphone in America. No one could afford it. You need lots of low-cost producers, and it's this smartphone in my pocket, it has stuff from 45 countries in it. So we need to lean into these highly machined, efficient global supply chains, but with countries who share our values, who want to strengthen and protect a rules-based, open, free international economic and trade order, and strategically, check China and others, and strategically cut them out of key chokeholds or strategic components that we don't want them using for military advantage, for competitive advantage. We don't want them to monopolize our PPE. And so this idea of allyshoring that we promoted became kind of an internationally circulating policy virus, where people started talking about it around the world and trying to animate it. President Biden, the Biden White House had embraced a bit more than we feared. We thought they'd just be talking about domestic everything. They talked about friendshoring, language like we can't go it alone and everything. We need to have allies. We're stronger together. So then accelerate economic change in regions of our democracies that aren't finding it. Recent years, it's been trying to put these two pieces together, but do it in a way that doesn't push away our allies, but draws us closer and strengthens the collective hand, the economic might of the shared family of democratic nations, which will make us stronger in checking China. So, we've been talking about how do we replace things like, domestic content with democratic content requirements. We did this you remember the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed a few years ago was the big investment in EVs and clean energy. It did this in a narrow band. It basically said, we're going to count every part of those cars that come from Canada and Mexico as domestic content. And so that car will qualify for the generous credits, incentives. But what we did in that is we stiff-armed French, Germans, Japanese who say, wait a minute, we make parts of your cars too. You're saying you're going to push us away with this thing and not draw us closer and make us part of a bigger, better, more prosperous co-production system? And so there really is true from an economic point of view. It's really hard for people to always get it, because people who study any economics probably don't communicate very well, like me. But you really do bake a bigger pie when you lean into this interdependent economic relationships, co-production system. We just had a group of students I took from Gettysburg College, we went to the German embassy, and their trade officer, topic of the moment, like, what's going on? What is your response going to be if we have all these tariffs that might come on friends and foes alike? And they're like, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to deal with it. But this is a German, trade minister. America is not an island. If you take that route, you will get a bigger piece, of a smaller pie. And so what I think we need to argue for is baking the bigger pie. We co-produce cars, office systems together with other businesses and countries around the world. Comparative advantage, that's the economic terms for saying specialize in what you do really well. And we each in our countries do a lot of things really well with our allies at the high end of the economic value chain. And we got to stay on that high end together, not separately, in key sectors like AI and biomedical and semiconductors and quantum computing. And stay at the high end wherever someone's good at making those high-end things. So I've had these study tours of Europeans coming to America, Americans going to Europe to look at what they're doing around economic development in regions of their country. We got kind of tired of everywhere we went, whether it's in Charleroi, in Belgium, to this biomedical imaging facility, to a sophisticated kind of paint, craft beer can painting operation in Milwaukee, that the Germans like have the monopoly on the giant machines that are doing this work, that are image scanning and biomedical fields and are, putting sophisticated, these are machines that are like big as a house on the paint thing. But then we went into the Office of Technology, the IT Secretariat in Berlin of the German government, that ministry. And we went to a meeting there with the secretary of their sort of secretary of IT. And I looked around the office, and they have the high-tech, office systems, I looked around, oh, Steelcase, Grand Rapids, glad we could help you out. And that's just a great example. Like, we're really good at that stuff, and they're buying it. And yeah, the Germans are really good at this stuff. So there's those fastest super semiconductor chips that NVIDIA designs and that are manufactured somewhere. It's a Danish firm who, Greenland's part of Denmark. A Danish firm is the place that makes the giant machines that puts the stuff on the semiconductor chip that we design and that NVIDIA helps do the software for. And they're doing some of it in Montana, employing people in Montana with Danish giant super semiconductor machines that are making the thing that's most valuable in the world right now. That's how interrelated we are. And when we say we got to make all the semiconductors here, I mean, the only reason, in my view, it's a national security issue, is most of the semiconductor manufacturing was being done in Taiwan. And yeah, if China eats Taiwan tomorrow, that's a problem. And so we do have to spread that around, including at home. So that brings us up today. So today we have to enhance and fortify the collective economic and political hand of democracies. And we need to lead an expanded and reinvigorated Western alliance in the face of continued aggressive intent and growing collaboration on the part of China, North Korea, Russia, Iran. And so obviously we're all hopeful that President Trump would step in and lead the economic bloc of allied countries in this direction. These early signs aren't encouraging. But even if we walk away, which as an American, I do not want us to walk away from global leadership. It chagrins me to see that happening. We should be leading these efforts. But if we walk away at all, then the leadership of other democratic allies in NATO and other countries around the world needs to step up and find a way to keep enhancing the economic strength of the collective. And while difficult, it's doing more ally-shoring. It's making concrete paths for how we do that in Asia, Europe, UK, hopefully us, Latin and South America. That would provide a stronger economy, is the underpinning of all our military strength collectively. It's the underpinning of our soft power in the world. It's our underpinning of our political influence in the world. And it's also a way to strengthen and reassure. You've got now new NATO countries who are worried about, are we going to stand together and be economically strong and militarily strong and make the things? If Russia tries to pick off a Baltic state or invade, we have to stand together in this kind of alliance of Western nations. And so there's a one way of thinking out there that in the face of this fracturing of the Western alliance, that And if the U.S. walks away from leadership of that effort, because the U.S. could easily lead the global, let's come together and make an alliance, as we did of defense agreements to strengthen our defense posture vis-a-vis the Chinas and Russias of the world. Let's come together and make an economic strength alliance and figure out how we become stronger, baking a bigger pie together. The U.S., would be the one to lead that. If we don't lead it, Germany, Europe, Asia, Japan need to do something similar. But it's not pulling back into regional blocks of nations. That Europe goes its one way, Asia goes another way, the Americas go their own way. This is something French President Macron has talked about. Europe needs to be for Europe. We need regional autonomy. We need to make our own game plan. I think that's a foreign policy cul-de-sac. It's leaving each regional bloc isolated, smaller, and weaker economically, politically. And it's exactly what Russia and China want, make it easier to pick them apart, play them against each other. So now is the time to step up. You've got an actually economically weakened China. You've got a Russia that is looking for an out because they can't keep this up. They want to have an out that accomplishes what they can say they getting back some of the empire. But so even in the absence of our leadership, which I hope it's not too late to reverse, democracies and like-minded partners around the world can step up and maintain the building of a highly integrated global economic system that's stronger together and not by retreating into regional fortresses. Now's the time that we need to be about equipping ourselves with the economic strength and the political will collectively to maintain this democratic rules-based order at home while checking authoritarian interests abroad. And we need to demonstrate to the world by working together that democratic systems deliver more in the form of both political freedom and economic opportunity than authoritarian nations. Think of those developing world countries that are saying, do I work with China or do I work with the West and the US on development? We have to be in there saying, hey, here's our offer to help you realize your own better future, create your own economy, create your own jobs. And we, as bad as we are sometimes in the world, we do way more respect the rule of law, respect for freedom of expression. We protect the rights of workers and people and women. And so it's a better outcome for developing nations, but we've been absent from that in recent years. So next week, I'm going to go to Munich, joining with the German Council on Foreign Relations and leaders from the Europe, UK, Asia, and the world at the Munich Security Conference. Has anyone heard about it? This is the first time I'm going. It's like I'm a little nervous because this is a huge deal, but all the other attendees are like the defense minister of Finland and the foreign minister and NATO generals and stuff. But we know what we have to try to do and promote, and we're going to run a session on exactly what I'm talking to you tonight. How we strengthen democracy's collective hand and build that kind of economic alliance for growth of the family of nations that want to lift up and support and keep in place an open, free, rights-respecting economic order in the world, not give it away to those who respect no rights, who allow corruption, who abuse people and workers in the pursuit of their own future. This really is about how we invest within our countries, but do it in a way that invests without and Allyshores without and works closer together. So as I said, just as we formed a common defense alliance, which has been highly functional, and even we stepped up with Ukraine and we added even non-democratic nations who are stepping up. We want to give arms to Ukraine. Maybe we can't, if we do it on the QT, but there's like 70 countries sitting at a table over there, that our defense secretary has been convening to plan how and where you get the stuff Ukraine needs to defend itself from a military side. We need the same sort of collaboration and table set and family of nations working together. I want to say, how do we build a strong economy, strengthen our collective economies so that we can stand strong in the world against those who do want to knock down the freedom-loving, rights-respecting international order that actually has brought more prosperity and good things to the world than any in history. China was smart enough 40 years ago to basically participate in it. They became bigger, stronger, economically engaged in the world, and richer, fast. And now they're trying to, again, like the old Soviet system in China, they're trying to control it, manage it, delimit how people can be creative within it. You know, that's a good thing for us because it means they're not, I mean, think about it. 5 years ago, the question was when China was going to become the biggest economy in the world. Now the question, it's likely not going to become the biggest economy in the world ever. But a few years ago, it was like, it was not if it was going to happen, it was like when it's going to happen. Now it's probably not going to happen. So we need to take advantage of the fact that we are the most dynamic, creative, innovative economy. If we keep doing the things that have made us, you know, great, in my view. We invest in people, their education, innovation. We allow the best and the brightest in the world to keep coming here and do their thing here and enjoy our freedoms. And that has kept us strong. And so I hope we can persuade each other in a difficult time to do it again and to keep at it. So thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Good discussion starter. I'm Michael from the World Affairs Council, and Erica and I will have microphones here, and it's time for you to engage in some dialogue. We value this very highly at the World Affairs Council, and you can do that here by raising your hand. We'll give you the microphone. Or if you're watching remotely, 616-308-6560. You can text. I guess you could do that right here too if you wanted to. You could text your question there and we'll try to get it into the mix. And you know our house rules at the World Affairs Council. You ask your question respectfully and succinctly. Right, so discussion.
Thank you very much for your talk. Question, what do you see as the role of development assistance in strengthening democracy's collective hand, and especially in light of recent events?
Right. No, I think it's a great question because a lot of what we were beginning to sort of game out is how can we use tools we have, like development assistance, to kind of provide that better development offer to developing world countries than what China is bringing in, which, and it, you know, it includes development aid, infrastructure building, but we have more collective resources, particularly in our private sector. Like when we go in and start creating a new, let's just say, lithium mine or EV factory in a developing country, let's just use that hypothetical. We're matching our interests in having a global sector or industry be kind of developed in this free, open economic sphere. But we're also, if we do it right, meeting their development needs. Where do you want to go, Angola? You know, and how do we help, or Paraguay? How do we help you meet your economic aspirations, develop your local industry? We have way more private capital and stuff to invest in that in a money-making, you know, free market way. But we have to really turn attention to use tools we've got, you know, development assistance, infrastructure, business assistance, the loans that we can make for development in the developing world. We can use that in a strategic, effective way to help people grow their own economies as part of like team good, you know.
Great follow-up. We've got a question from a remote viewer from Davenport University. Can you speak about the ways in which human rights impacts allyshoring, and what issues related to human rights might be challenges moving forward?
Well, I think this is sort of one of the dimensions of the kind of fundamental difference in, again, economic models that we have between, you know, what West is not a good term, you know, because there's more countries that aren't in the West that are sort of part of a wanting to respect a rules-based, rule of law, freedom, rights-respecting regime. So let me just give you some example. You know, when Russia or China goes into the critical minerals being mined in Africa, you know, they are happy to pay off the dictator, bring in their own technology companies, and totally abuse the workers who work in horrid conditions with no rights, no health standards, nothing, and are dying. And they enforce it sometimes with mercenary troops like the Wagner Group. You're going to get shot if you don't go back to work in this mine. That's the Chinese-Russian model. Our model, as sometimes imperfect as it is like we expect in things we finance or support or our businesses are engaged with to respect rule of law, not corruption, respect the civil rights, working conditions, freedom of expression, too, of people doing that work with us in a developing country, for example. Look at the slave labor in China. We don't want to tolerate that or punish companies who engage in slave labor. China is happy to have a bunch of slave laborers as part of their system they control.
Can I go ahead? Okay. So like two of the most challenging problems going forward, sort of world economy, would be global climate change and the growing demographics sort of happening. Let's say that population reduction. Both of them require a grasp a lot of complex issues going forward in time, and intervention is very complicated. At the same time, we see the polarization that seems to be around education as much as anything. When you look at the world, people who are educated understand those problems better, are taught to understand them better, and yet there are the majority of people don't have access to that. So what's the hope to try to move us to address those critical long-term issues when we can't get past sort of the attention issues around our own leadership right now? There's no air, no oxygen for the important things. What are some things, what is a way out of that?
You spoke to three big dimensions: climate change, migration, immigration, and education. Let me just take two of those. On one, I think your business leadership here in West Michigan has long been there, and business leaders and others around the world. The money to be made and the growth in jobs and whole sectors of our economy are about solving the big world problems in a sustainable way. Clean energy, smart mobility systems that don't wreck the planet, healthy food for the developing world, smart water solutions. Your big producers here have wrung out, energy use and carbon footprint from their global suppliers because they know the sustainable solutions that make everything work more efficiently and don't wreck the planet, the sustainable enterprises and systems that do that are where the money is to be made in the world. And so we need to work together, and all of our, democratic nations are trying to, at least episodically, we're probably off again, on again, but certainly in Europe, no, we're going to lead this green revolution. We're going to develop all the technologies, all the systems that zero out carbon and don't wreck the planet through, water use. And so there's the work of tomorrow, the industries of the future, just like the industries of last decade, were to solve big problems of healthy food and getting the world on wheels, is how do you provide sustainable solutions for the world in moving people, in feeding the people, in providing clean energy for them. And we got the horsepower to lead those efforts, particularly collectively, if we collaborate, not push each other away. On education, I just wrote, actually it was not cheeky. My Heartland Transformation Network partners in Europe, we said, okay, what are the top 10 things President Trump, now in office, should do if he was effective and serious about delivering for the kind of heartland voters that put him in office? And one of the things is, as you may have noticed in the results, he got a lot of support from people without, post-secondary degrees. And the Democrats are all wringing their hands, we don't know how to talk to working people anymore. We actually know the one thing, and a lot of those people without post-secondary degrees, it directly correlates with their own economic condition. They're anxious because they're not, you can't, they're 99% of the jobs since the Great Recession in America that pay a living wage for a family requires some education past high school. Post-secondary technical education, higher education, there are no high-paying, no-skill, low-skill jobs in America because we're a high-wage country. So if we're really serious about delivering economic opportunity for people, we'd get everybody the great education that they deserve. And they'd be secure in the world. If you have a higher education and advanced skills, you're secure and you're also not worried. So that's job one for all of us, is to deliver that reality of a great higher level education in whatever discipline, whatever domain. You know, artists are designing automobiles, and you know, anthropologists are creating new apps for social media. It's not just engineers and software and data science people like my son, who's like pulling information about you out of the cloud to sell you new healthcare products, you know. Sorry about that. But people, and you know, the people working in the factory of today, it's like a clean room and they're programming robots. You know, and that's a different job than it was 50 years ago.
Thank you for the discussion. It was very interesting. It seems hard to argue with the points around baking a bigger pie and being stronger with allies. I mean, it was very persuasive arguments, but they weren't persuasive enough for most Americans. So it seems to me, and this comes back a little bit to what you were saying a moment ago about, you know, education and the heartlands. It seems to me that priority number one needs to be, you know, bringing the rest of the country on board with those persuasive arguments. If we don't do that, there's a risk we'll never adopt the policies that you are advocating, and that we will continue to get, well, basically weaker and poorer.
Yeah.
Thoughts about how we might go about doing that?
Well, that's why, I mean, I think people feel the way they feel. And as you know, people vote emotions and how they're feeling. They don't vote the facts of the case. This is not going to necessarily help me economically in my pocketbook. They vote their feelings. And so that's why I think you can only kind of change the attitudes and direction of people's minds when they're feeling differently. And let's talk about trade for example. Like, trade is now a dirty word in America because you've had both left and right saying you're getting screwed by NAFTA and trade, and it's why you lost your job, and so many people in communities like around Michigan are out of work. And it's true, people are feeling anxious and out of work and mad about that, and you know, that's real. If we had really treated the root problem, we would have figured out how everybody dislocated from trade, because as you know, most of the dislocation and loss of jobs in manufacturing has been automation and other things, not trade related, but some of it is, because you open up global markets, somebody does it cheaper, you in that occupation don't have a job anymore. But you can, but we just don't in this country, retrain, upskill everybody to get the job of today, like the ones I just described. And that's possible to do. We just haven't done it. We haven't spent money. You know, our trade adjustment assistance is pathetic. Our workforce training system is almost non-existent. This is where the Germans do a heck of a lot better, because they have 50 years of saying, no, we're going to help manage and ease this, they're good planners. We're going to manage the transition out of coal and steel production in the whole Ruhr and help these people find a place, and they put money into training, retraining, education, and relocation even if necessary. We just don't do that, and it does affect the attitudes of the voters. The Ruhr region, which is like our steel belt, you know, the Ruhr was their heavy industries like Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania. 50 years ago, 500,000 people in steel and coal. No colleges or universities. 50 years later, no one employed in steel and coal, and the highest, they built universities as one element and did all this retraining and stuff of building a new future. And their voters, they eased the transition, they eased the pain, they helped the relocation and upskilling to new things of people who then don't feel as angry and anxious, and they don't vote like the voters, you know, outside Pittsburgh in the old shattered steel towns who are mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. Yeah.
You said that we should prioritize sustainability in pursuing growth, but is it reasonable to expect that we are able to just continuously grow? Why should we make that our priority in light of the severity of the climate crisis?
Well, see, I don't, it's not an either or. And that's what we've done some, and I try to paint the picture. The growing businesses, the growing arenas of high-paying jobs are about solving these global problems of sustainability and building the technologies and the businesses that solve the world's problems that are many of them implicated in a sustainable planet, not wrecking the planet, being good stewards of the planet. So it goes together. Let me tell you my favorite story illustrating this, not just that you in Grand Rapids here, you became the greenest mid-sized city in the country. You actually set goals for reducing your carbon footprint, your water use, and other things. It was your business leadership that did that, knowing that that's where the future is, that's where the future of business is to show how to do that and make money and build businesses. Anybody here know Fred Keller of Cascade Engineering? Okay, so Cascade Engineering, big auto parts, plastic and technical auto parts company here. You look under your car hood, it's, plastics. Fred, as many of you know, was kind of a visionary CEO. He took them into the future. This is going to be a stagnant or maybe declining sector, sort of in mass, auto parts. I'm going to take us into the realms of sustainability. We're making recyclable plastic. We're making solar panel holders. My favorite product is they cooked up this water filter, that plastic injected molded water filter that you can use with materials found in Africa and the developing world to filter water so you can drink it. And 60% of people in the developing world who are in the hospital are there because of waterborne pathogens. So you're manufacturing with the competencies that made you great in one of our great industries, autos, save the world, save health product. And you get the corollary benefit of, I remember talking to Fred's daughter who was running this division. You're making something here in Grand Rapids that you're solving world problems linked to, broadly speaking, sustainability. He says, I've got all, our young people have been leaving us in Michigan because they want to solve the problems of the future and they don't think they can do it in Michigan with old, dirty industry. But if she was saying, environmental engineers coming out of Grand Valley and other places, they learned that they could solve a global problem working at a traditional company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They're staying in Grand Rapids. They're tripping over themselves to go intern at a place like that because they want to be part of companies that are solving the problems of today and tomorrow. And it also, they value saving the world and not wrecking the planet. They want to work for people that are doing that work. And it makes Grand Rapids be a place where young people come to, not flee.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Oh.
You made a passing reference to India. Where do you see India? It's part of the BRICS organization. And is Modi on US side or on Putin's side?
So for those of you who don't, so BRICS is this Brazil, Russia, India, China. A few years ago, these emerging economies that were, and I think Putin and others are trying to purposely use that kind of affinity group to provide kind of an alternative power block of nations vis-a-vis, U.S., Europe, allies in Asia, Japan. I think Modi, I would say, is one of many leaders, including Erdogan in Turkey and others who are trying to have it both ways. We're going to be friendly with you. Oh, and we want to be friendly with you too. And we get benefits from that. And, we, at some point, in my view, you sort of have to pick a side. But, and Brazil's doing the same thing, even with a very left-wing government. They're kind of cozy. I would encourage you, there was a great article in recent Atlantic Monthly all about India. And Modi was looking to strengthen his authoritarian hold on India, but the voters said no. Wait a minute! In this last big election, because life is worse, not better, for more Indians. He's in the name of kind of Hindu ethno-nationalism and strongman, I will deliver for you. He's basically gutted things that actually can build a better life. The education system is a shambles. Talk about environmental degradation. It's horrific. The higher education system, which India has some top tier places, is like a mess. The infrastructure is crumbling. So this is a great article. I encourage you to read. It told me things about the fundamentals of building economies, like investing in people, health, environmental health, education, are now getting worse in India, not better, which means India's opportunity, it's now the most populous country on earth. I remember when China was that. India's now bigger. It was, could be like the factory of the world, but not if you kind of disable the things that support your people. I mean, China did take the other route. It actually, for a while, like really built up. They came to America. They used to come to University of Michigan and other places to visit me, and they're basically like, how do we build these universities that are so dynamic and innovative and create all the new technologies, because we're going to build 20 of them like next week, So how do these things work anyway? So, and they were doing things like that. And now they're retrenching into this. We've seen command and control systems like of people are a death knell for the economy. They just don't work. You can't control the lives and minds of people, and they don't feel good about it, and they'll try to get out as fast as they can. So I think India's seen a little backlash against someone who wants to be, and that may or may not be your perspective. I'd be interested in your perspective after the talk. Yeah.
Let's take one more question here.
Hi. We're sort of talking about China as if it's just destined to be our economic enemy because of the authoritarian leadership, whatever. Is there a scenario where China could be urged or nudged to change its approach and try to do away with the exploitive practices and be our trade, and moral partner as opposed to our enemy? U.S. has certainly shifted from a slave-based economy to a less slave-based economy.
And I mean, I don't consider China our enemy whatsoever. And let me just note, for ever since Deng Xiaoping opened up, we actually were for years and years and years thinking this is great. Yes, this is a nation that actually is going to compete with us for that kind of entrepreneurial, innovative supremacy. But we've welcomed it as a good thing. They're engaging in the global economy. They're joining the World Trade Organization. They're sending their students to our universities, and they're going back home. And we welcome them, and we want to have cross-cultural understandings and joint business ventures and all this. And then, just really recently, in the last 10 years, as I said, the leadership there, we always thought that would nurture a democratic reforms. That they would tolerate and open up more liberal, political participation. And we saw, in Tiananmen Square that even with Deng, there were limits to how far he would let the political sphere be opened up. But for 30 years, we thought this is a good thing. They're opening, that will lead to other evolutions on their part. Then in recent years, it's like, no, China is very aggressively trying to, engineer its global dominance vis-a-vis. They're the ones that are choosing to try to knock down the Western US-led international system. They really want to knock it over or bulldoze it over and create an alternative model. And they're articulating that and following policies trying to do that very purposefully, including much more, because when people get free information, they start to think and act all crazily. So they've tightened down the screws on, information that their own citizens can get, on propaganda and on surveillance and punishment of anyone with, that's what they did under Mao, wrong thinking, incorrect thinking. Now, again, for a while, the Chinese could say and do and write and go and think what they wanted. Now they've chosen this other path. And so we can't, so we're back, unfortunately, in more like a Cold War situation. If they really have this intent to kind of, just as Russia would like to, annex other regions, if they really are serious about that, then we need to figure out how collectively we contain that until the system collapses of its own dysfunction, which is what we did effectively with the Soviet Union. No, I mean, they collapsed because that command and control system does not work for people. They want freedom. They want to be able to do what they want. The economy doesn't work anymore. I mean, that's what Gorbachev saw. And it did collapse.
Would you say that's what Trump's doing right now?
Did you hear that, John?
We're in a National Archive building. You said that. Both parties have The only thing now people agree on is negativity towards China. You know, you understand my sort of empathy for your position. I think a lot of what Trump's doing right now is actually helping China, as I tried to illustrate. Anytime you push away this strong alliance of like-minded nations and disrupt our economic partnerships, China is very powerful and influential, and they're aggressively, as we speak, trying to make deals with people who are getting stiff-armed by us, who are our friends.
Let's thank John Austin for getting us started.
Can I say one? I forgot to, I wanted to say one thing at the end, which comes back to you. You know, I really, really feel, and I always describe like different parts of Michigan and the Midwest and where people are politically, economically, culturally, and I always applaud West Michigan as having a lot of thoughtful people and sort of trying to maintain a path of thoughtful engagement with the world. And so, you know, you are a globally engaged community, and I really appreciate you coming out tonight. You know, your businesses, I know many of the business leaders, they play in the world and they bring the rewards back home, and I hope you have voice in this. Keep pushing our leaders to engage more, not walk away from the world. That would be my encouragement.
Thank you, John.
You got some influential leaders here, too.
Thank you, John, very much. We appreciate it. Thank you for coming out tonight. We will be back here 1 week from today. There were a couple questions about climate change. That'll be our topic for next week when